All right, give everyone a chance to file in here before I go through the logistics of the webinar. Welcome as you come in now. All right, so I'll make sure I type this out in the chat area as well, but I just wanted to cover a few logistics about how you interact with the webinar before I hand it off to today's moderator and get started. This is a Zoom webinar. If you haven't joined us for a coffee break before, it is pretty interactive. There's a lot of interactive features. Where it differs from the normal Zoom meeting is that your video and audio is by default muted. So you'll be able to hear us, but you won't be able to interrupt and we won't be able to see you. So if you want to interact with either us or the panelists, go ahead and use the chat feature for discussion, side questions, technical questions, that kind of thing. But if you have something that you want to ask the panelists directly, we do ask that you use the Q&A. We anticipate probably around 150 people joining today. And if there are questions, it's much easier to manage that when they're in the Q&A area. So to reiterate, Q&A for questions for the panelists and any technical issues, side discussion, etc., use the chat for that. Make sure that you select all attendees if you want other people to see it. Otherwise, it's automatically directed to the organizers and panelists. So without further ado, I want to hand it off to Melanie Gottlieb.
Thank you, Mike. I'm Melanie Gottlieb, Deputy Director at AACRAO, and I'd like to welcome you to today's coffee break on instructional planning for summer and fall. It's a pleasure to be on the line with all of you today as we navigate the challenges presented by the COVID-19 crisis together. With me today are institutional colleagues who have been gracious enough to share their time and their thoughts with us while trying to navigate the new normal on their own campuses. We have Tim Amix, Director of Admissions and College Registrar at Volunteer State Community College, Tara Arneson, Registrar at Champlain College in Vermont, Rick Sparks, AVP for Learning Systems Innovations and Effectiveness and University Registrar at Virginia Tech, and Rock McCaskill, Associate Registrar for Operations at Clemson University. Also with us today is AACRAO's own Dr. Wendy Kilgore, who is Director of Research and Managing Consultant. As always, we're hopeful that our technology won't fail us. This is a fairly large Zoom call with a number of panelists, and we're all working at the mercies of our home Wi-Fis. We're not using the video function, and your mics are all muted so as to save on bandwidth. Today's format will be slightly different than many of the other coffee breaks. We'll have a presentation of the most recent AACRAO survey data, and then we'll proceed with a conversation with our panelists who will share their opinions and experiences through directed questions posed to them pertaining to instructional delivery. As always, we'll have a Q&A with the audience at the end. Next slide. As you navigate the challenges in this crisis, your association is here to connect you with network colleagues to work through challenges together in this time of unprecedented disruption in our profession. We have opened up our content vaults to the higher education community through our free membership option. If your membership has lapsed, or if there are others on your campus that you want to have access to our resources to support them through this transition, we hope that you will consider this option, which will be available through June 30th. For more information, you can visit the AACRAO website or email membership@acrao.org. Next slide. I want to make you aware of other AACRAO content related to today's topic. You can find the publication Managing Academic Space, a guide for higher education institutions in the AACRAO bookstore. This publication covers scheduling classes, extracurricular use, community events, and understanding how to effectively manage space to increase in productivity, cost savings, and overall efficiency. Space is a topic that will come up later in the discussion. Next slide. AACRAO's work diligently to provide specific guidance to institutions as they navigate the decision-making on their campuses to adapt and serve their students. To build our guidance, we're using established AACRAO standards and re-envisioning them through the lens of the current COVID-19 crisis, and then consulting with subject matter experts from our board of directors and amongst the membership and across higher education. If you have suggestions for the guidance team to consider, please don't hesitate to contact us through the contact form at acro.org/COVID guidance. Next slide. I'd now like to turn the mic over to Wendy, who will talk about our COVID-19 practice surveys and present the data of the most recent survey. Wendy?
Thank you, Melanie. Welcome, everyone. I don't want to take too much time because our panelists have a lot to share. So just want to recap that we have now 4 impact reports based upon 4 surveys. The 4th one will post to the website today and be shared with those who are registered for the research list. And it is an update of the topics of the previous surveys, including enrollment indicators, course delivery plans, fall calendar changes, and we also asked some new questions about social distancing and other measures. So if you're interested in seeing that data in detail, which also includes this time, enrollment indicators for graduate and professional schools, that report is available to you on the AACRAO website. Thank you. Next slide, please. Just want to highlight some of the things that we found in this survey. 376 institutions responded, a variety of size, types, and controls. Most were from the US, 94%, but we had wanted to compare them to the last surveys, and not many more have made decisions about lots of things. So what I can really say is a lot of things are still very much up in the air, and I think the panelists might share some of that with you. But there's a lot of options being considered for social distancing measures, for changes in tuition, also about how they're going to deliver courses, whether they're going to be fully online, some hybrid, some high flex, shortened terms. Enrollment indicators changed a little bit. In summer, they look a little bit better than they did in early April, so the summer reportings is not as bleak. The fall reporting so far is about the same at the undergraduate level. By comparison, the graduate and professional indicators are a little less down than in comparison to the undergraduate. That's really what I have for this afternoon, and I wanted to hand it back to Melanie. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Wendy. Next slide. So as we've been discussing this topic over the last couple of weeks, preparing for the coffee break, this week, this particular tweet came up that really seemed to sum up the sense that we all have. Meetings lately are mostly like this. We don't know much. What we do know, we can't really tell you. Everything is going to change. And given the above, please make a plan. Next slide. Oh, and before we turn to our panelists, I'd like to ask our audience our first polling question. And so, Michael, if you could bring up the first polling question. There will be a poll question that pops up in your screen. And if you could answer that, we're just like to know, where are you working? Are you back to campus full time? Are you back to campus limited hours? Are you still only going to campus for essential business? Are you still fully teleworking? Or are you one of the campuses, one of the very few who never closed? We'll leave that open for just a minute or so. Michael, I'll let you decide.
Yeah, it's fun to watch the blue bars kind of launch back and forth. I'll leave it open for another 10 seconds here.
All right.
Alrighty.
And let's see. So as it appears, most people are either still fully teleworking or on campus for only a limited basis. There are 4% of you who are back to campus full time. And so that's not surprising. That seemed to be the way it worked with our panelists as well. So thank you for that. I'm going to turn to our first question with our panelists. You know, many campuses have put together a staged plan that requires a variety of landmarks to hit for staff to return to campus before the students return. And so I'd like to ask Rock first about what that plan looks like on his campus.
Good afternoon. Thanks, Melanie. So like many of you, our campus has been closed since early March, and all of us, with just a very few limited exceptions, have been completely away from campus, working remotely. As we look towards the fall, we know that in order to bring our students back, which again, that's our goal, is to get our students back on campus while keeping everyone safe. In order to do that, we've got to open campus first. So right now we're looking at a phased approach over the next few weeks, next coming weeks. Phase one, as defined by our emergency operations group as they monitor the numbers, phase one is scheduled to begin no earlier than June 1. So hopefully in June 1, we'll be able to bring back a very limited number of people to take care of some essential things that we need done. For example, in the registrar's office, that includes getting our diplomas in the mail. We haven't been allowed to have people on campus to even pack those up. So we're hoping June 1, we can bring back a skeleton crew, get those in the mail and out to the graduates. Assuming the numbers continue where they're supposed to, we will move into phase 2 2 weeks later or longer, depending on how the numbers look. So the earliest we'll come back into phase 2 will be June 15, sorry. And at that point, we start bringing everyone back, except those who have significant issues with either childcare or someone in the home who's immunocompromised. During that second phase, we'll rotate people in and out of the office, sort of just a practice to allow people to get used to where they're at, get used to wearing masks, get used to social distancing in the office, and just trying to figure out how it's going to work when we actually do open. And again, that phase 2, will last at least 2 weeks, maybe longer, again, depending on the numbers. And as we continue to monitor those, we'll eventually move into hopefully phase 3. Phase 3 will be really fully open, social distancing measures, having the doors open, allowing customers to come in. And that's what we need to get in order to open our doors for fall. So that's where Clemson's at.
Sorry, forgot to unmute. Thanks so much, Rock. Before I move on to the other question, the next question, I just want to check in and make sure that none of our panelists have anything that they want to add to that. All right. So I'd like to go to the second poll question before I ask the next question of the panelists. So Mike, if you could put up the next poll question, that would be great. As we have been exploring this issue and hearing from our institutional colleagues from across the country, we have heard some folks do have an interdepartmental planning committee working through this crisis. And so we're curious if that is the case for you. Give people a minute.
Open for another 10 seconds, yeah.
Okay, great. And while we are waiting for that, I will say that the issues around instructional delivery are really complicated. And so I'm going to ask my panelists to talk about the decision-making on their campuses, who's involved, how long that process has been in place, and what it looks like. I am seeing that based on the results, 85% of you have said yes, you do have a planning committee. 8% say no, and another 7% are still working on forming that committee. So I'd like to maybe first ask Tara, talk about the decision-making process on your campus. Who's involved? How long's it been in place? What does this look like for you?
Thanks, Melanie. I just want to give a little background about Champlain College because I know I'm the smallest institution on this panel today, and actually sometimes we get confused with a secondary school in Quebec, which is right over the border from us. So we are a small private college in Burlington, Vermont. We have about 2,000 traditional students on our campus, and then about another 2,000 undergraduate students online and about 1,000 graduate students online. So we also have campuses in Montreal and Dublin. So we do have a pretty big study abroad program. As we started to plan during the pandemic, we have an academic leadership team that is primarily comprised of our provost, our 5 deans, an associate provost who would make a majority of these decisions. And as we quickly started to shift in the early spring, that group expanded, and it went from just our deans and our provost to our deans, our provost, our entire academic affairs department, which includes our director of institutional reporting, our director of assessment, myself, and then our directors in our Center for Teaching and Learning, who are our instructional designers and the people that really support our faculty on campus. And for a very long time, we were meeting every morning. We'd be together for an hour or two just discussing what our next steps should be. How should we plan for the summer? And now that we've moved into fall planning, that is a majority of our discussions. But we have been able to step back from daily meetings to now meet Monday, Wednesday, Friday. And as we move into the summer, we're hoping to move to just a Tuesday, Thursday discussion. We also fortunately had our academic business continuity standards in place. Again, being in northern Vermont, we do get a fair amount of snow. I was saying earlier, it was snowing up until about 2 weeks ago. And we've had some things in place where all of our faculty needed to have a shell in our learning management system, which is Canvas, and they needed to have their syllabus posted in Canvas so that if we ever did need to pivot like we did, most people would be ready to conduct their business online or remotely, as we've been doing with some synchronous sessions involved. So, and fortunately, because we do have around 3,000 online students, we have a really robust online division that has been able to provide us with some support. So we made the pivot, and we're now planning for fall with this expanded leadership team.
Great, thanks, Tara. Tim, did you want to talk a little bit about what that looks like on your campus as a community college?
Yeah, so we have a leadership team that is across the entire institution that immediately was spun up as a part of our pandemic plan. We actually had put a plan in place in 2008, honestly thinking that we probably would never use it since H1N1 did not become a problem in our area. But we did have that plan, which was our starting spot. Our folks are at that level are meeting twice a week, and again, cross campus. They're actually broken down into 4 functional teams, which are dealing with everything from communication to social distancing and monitoring, cleaning. Of course, there's an academics team and a student support team. So they're addressing those issues. Then we further broke down that academic team. It's sort of now a steering committee. And then our deans and department chairs, faculty are all working to determine exactly what we can accomplish as far as bringing students back, what if we can't. And we've taken a 3-phase approach. The optimistic approach is everyone returns. The pessimistic approach is that nobody can return. Those both were fairly easy for us. We have a solid history of distance learning, and our students are accustomed to that. But it's that middle ground where I think we're all struggling. And that's, what if we can bring some people back, or we have to bring people back under social distancing rules, and how does all of that look? So that planning has been going on pretty much since the minute we decided to leave. And I was on a call right before this where we were still planning. So we too are struggling and with figuring that out. And I think that's something that adds to some of the anxiety there is knowing that the CARES Act funding is out there, and how we choose to deliver our classes may have impact on students receiving resources from the federal government. So we're trying to take that into consideration, which is tough because it's a moving target.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Tim. Before I move on, is there anyone else who wants to comment on what this looks like on their campus, either Rick or Rock?
Yeah, hey, this is Rick. Melanie, real quick, I'll just say that at Virginia Tech, we have the benefit and I guess also the misfortune of having a fairly robust emergency management plan and structure as a result of the shootings on our campus that go back to 2007. And so when this first started, I think we, and many campuses have this at this point, but we were able to get spun up pretty quickly because we already had an executive leadership team followed by an incident management team with representatives already identified because that's a standing group that is there and only activated as needed. So we were able to get up and running pretty quickly when this first started, which allowed us to make some pretty quick decisions off right out of the bat.
Excellent.
And I'll jump in real quick too, if you don't mind,
Great.
Melanie.
Absolutely.
Clemson's model is very similar to Rick's. Fortunately, we haven't had the type of crisis they've had to have to deal with, but the team was already identified. It met regularly when it had to, and then people get pulled in as emergencies came up. For us, that had been more things like hurricanes, snowstorms, things like that. But it quickly had to use that word everybody loves right now and pivot to dealing with this situation.
Yeah, Mel, this is Tim. I think that Rock and Rick both bring up a good point. Our pandemic response was built off of an emergency management plan that was related to a tornado that hit our campus and shut us down in the mid-2000s. So we've built off of that lesson in order to understand where we needed to be today.
Yes, I've been hearing about all of our campus colleagues who have had to develop emergency preparedness planning and committee structures and such. And I'm envisioning some AACRAO professional development around this topic in the near future. So let's talk a little bit about summer. Here we are getting close to the start of those of you who might have summer terms. What does summer enrollment look like for you? And what adaptations have you made to your summer programming in order to manage all of this? I will ask Rick first.
Yeah, thanks, Melanie. We made the call fairly early on for summer, and I think a lot of folks did. Summer was a easier call for us and for most institutions, just because there was still so much uncertainty. Unlike fall, that is obviously a lot more complicated. But we made that call fairly early, and did a lot of outreach and push to our students, so it was real clear that what we were going to do. And there was no question of exactly what classes were going to look like. And so as a result, we were able to change our timetable pretty quickly, show that everything was virtual. We communicated directly with students to say, hey, just so you know, and what we were surprised by is that enrollment didn't drop. I personally expected to see it go down because of folks that were planning to be there in person. But we actually saw the reverse. Our summer enrollment is up nearly 20% across the board, our undergraduate and graduate population. So we're pleasantly surprised, obviously, but Virginia Tech does not have a history of a strong online presence. That's not been our focus. And we're in a rural community. And so summer has never been a tremendously big offering simply because the attraction to stay in the area is not what maybe some larger cities or larger areas benefit from. And so at Virginia Tech, summer's always been solid, but it's been modest. And so all of a sudden to see that much of an increase, we were pleasantly surprised. So the only explanation that I have is nothing more than a guess at this point. And it is that I'm assuming that there are populations of our students who've never had an opportunity to do all online. And as a result of what they were forced into in the spring, discovered that they liked it, or it fit their schedule, or they felt that they could be successful at it. And as a result, I think we've seen a little bit of an increase.
Thanks, Rick. Tim, can you talk a little bit about your summer enrollment?
Yeah, our summer enrollment has stayed fairly level. Much like Rick, we expected to see a decline, but our students that were with us in the spring, they continued on with us in the summer. We leveled out some because our applicant pool has decreased for the summertime, and we're seeing the same effect in fall. I think everyone is, that the applicant pool isn't what we would like, as students are reluctant to make decisions or considering gap years. But we are fairly stable in our summer enrollment, which actually is interesting because we've always relied heavily on our science classes in the summer to make enrollment. But our science faculty were very concerned about academic rigor, learning outcomes, if we were not able to do on-ground laboratories. And so that's something that we didn't do. We're not offering hardly any science courses this summer. If our faculty didn't feel that the learning outcomes would be at the same level as they would on ground, then we made the decision to not offer those courses this summer. So if we had been able to offer those, I think we would have been up fairly significantly. And I actually was on the phone with our science dean this morning. We are very concerned right now about getting that rigor back in place in the fall, or we actually are in danger of strangling our own student pipeline, since we have many, many health science programs at Ball State that rely on those anatomy and physiology classes in order to prepare those students to enter those programs. So we've got to find a way to get that back going. But our enrollment's stable, but we have very specific concerns about courses that we're not comfortable offering.
Thanks, Tim. We're going to switch gears just a little bit. Just in time to have this discussion on Tuesday, the CDC released new guiding principles for higher education. I've asked Michael Sisson to drop this link in the chat area, just in case you haven't seen these new guidelines. But I'm interested in the thoughts and reactions to the guidelines from our panelists. And I think I'm going to go to Tim first.
For us, Melanie, these are all things that I feel like we're working on. I didn't see anything significantly new in this guidance that we weren't trying to take into consideration. But I shared with the panelists this morning, there's very similar guidelines for the K-12 system. And when you start applying this to them, it's a problem for them, because some things are kind of impossible. I think the impossibility for us, as we've looked at our classroom space, is the social distancing aspect of it. I know everyone is struggling with that. For the majority of our classrooms, our student-teacher ratio is probably, I think we're about 18-to-1. So when we actually look at our classroom space, we can't get more than 8 students in any classroom, except for 1 or 2 that would allow for the 6-foot social distancing. And so that's a big concern. We have lots of questions about how to clean between classes, and frankly, for being able to afford or even obtain the level of cleaning supplies that we would need in order to clean between every course.
Yeah, there's a lot to parse out in terms of that social distancing. I'm wondering if any of our other panelists would like to comment before we move on to a question about physical spaces.
Melanie, real quick, this is Rick. One thing that has stood out to us, and I'm with Tim, I don't think there was anything here that was brand new, but seeing the low, more, and highest risk descriptions for both housing and classroom side by side, it has started a little bit of a conversation on our campus about all the effort, and I guess that's the tease of the next question, that's going into the physical classroom and trying to land on that more risk scenario, which is the 6 feet apart, and reducing the capacity, living right beside what is potentially going to be the highest risk category for our res halls, in that there'll be full capacity, which I think is pretty standard. That's not an attempt to take a stab at our student affairs colleagues at Virginia Tech, because I think that's pretty standard on most campuses. But it's caused a few questions, even as on our campuses recently as this morning, of, well, gosh, are we gonna do all this work just to send them back to a full residence hall? you know, is that a smart way to go? So there's not an answer there, Melanie. And in fact, that may bring up more questions, but it's one awareness that we've had the way that these are published, and a conversation that is starting at Virginia Tech anyway.
And I think this is Rock. I can tag on to the end of that as well. So again, with our model, I think Tim said there's multiple teams dealing with multiple areas. Well, our housing folks are also dealing with what do they do with housing and looking at, do they reduce capacities? What do we do with those extra students? We don't want to not have anywhere for them to live, but we are certainly evaluating those same options. How do we have a place for everyone to live where they're not sitting on top of each other every night? And I don't mean that in any kind of negative way. It's just the dorms are typically full. We're usually at capacity or over capacity. So I think that's, even though not in the realm of the registrar or admissions officer, it certainly is hugely affecting what we're going to do, because the decision has to be made looking at both sides of that equation. It doesn't do us any good to make a decision about classrooms or cutting capacities of classes or spreading the schedule if, again, they're going to walk out the door, be in the hallways, be in the dorms. We've got to figure out how do we handle that social distancing on both sides of the house. And that goes back to that enrollment management, not even just enrollment management, but institutional management model of an emergency operations, very much cross-functional group with representatives from everywhere.
Thanks. Yes, Rock, that absolutely is an excellent point. I think as we think about the interdependency of all of the units on campus, how we work together as a campus, how we plan strategically, a crisis like this really underlines the importance of needing to have a very strong strategic enrollment management group that looks holistically at the whole institution, because it does take a village. I'd like to talk a little bit more about physical spaces. What are you talking about doing on your campus to social distance? What are the most challenging considerations? We've talked about some of them. Tara, do you have anything else you'd like to add to this?
Sure, thanks, Melanie. I mean, similar to what Tim, Rick, and Rock have all said, these are all things that we're looking at, but from my lens, we are truly trying to look at all of our academic spaces to see what we can do. And again, being a small college, we have 9 academic buildings with only 29 general classrooms. And then of those classrooms, they hold anywhere from 10 to 55 students. And then we have about 12 specialized lab spaces, because some of our bigger programs are in digital forensics, cybersecurity, game design, game programming. We are very heavy on these tech programs, and the students are quite literally on top of each other in those spaces. So a lot of what we're doing, reviewing the CDC's recommendations, reviewing what the American College Health Association is telling us, and trying to determine how to maybe tweak our fall schedule if we do welcome students back to our campus in the fall, which is what a lot of institutions want to do. We want to see the students back on our campus, but then how do we keep them safe? How do we keep our faculty safe and our staff safe? So, you know, right now we are just starting to talk about what could that fall schedule look like if we have students on campus, if we're only able to house, you know, X number of students safely in our dormitories, because we reduce that down to maybe just singles. Maybe every student comes back and has a single room, or maybe they're just sharing with one other person. But then within our academic spaces, if that classroom we have that only holds 10, do we now only allow 4 students in there? And then, you know, there's another 10 students attending the class remotely. We are considering making some staircases you can only go up, and some staircases you can only go down. Similar, I think of the grocery store, quite frankly, right? You have arrows pointing which way you can go down the aisle and how you can enter the checkout lines. And I can only assume right now is that's what our academic spaces are going to look like. Some of our biggest questions or planning needs right now with the fall because we design a schedule so that students are attending Monday, Thursday, or Tuesday, Friday. They all go to class at the same time. They all leave at the same time. We're in a place where if we are going to welcome our students back, we need to consider shifting that model pretty dramatically and saying, looking at each building, seeing how many classes are in that building at any given time, and then deciding from there how many will start at 8 o'clock, how many can start at 8:10, how many can start at 8:30, and take it from there. And then also our community spaces, and what do our community spaces look like for the students? We fortunately have a lot of outside space, but then, you know, it's gets to be pretty cold in the winter, and not everybody is going to want to congregate outside. So we are trying to implement strategies that will promote behavior on a campus that will reduce the spread of the disease, hanging up flyers, putting up hand sanitizing stations, reminding students how to wash their hands, but it's still really adjusting our schedule if we are on campus in the fall. And then what does inside our academic space look like? And those are all things we're trying to think through right now.
Thanks, Tara. That's actually a perfect segue to my next set of questions. I'd like to ask all of the audience the next live poll question. And that has to do with your decision-making on your fall delivery model. I'm curious, have you made a decision and announced it? Have you made a decision, but you haven't announced it yet? Are you still in the planning for multiple scenarios, or do you just not know? And we'll give people a minute or two to answer that question.
I'll give it another 10 seconds or so here. We have about
Perfect.
76% in.
So while we're waiting for those results to come in, what we hear is that a lot of campuses haven't yet made a public decision. And actually and that was in our survey data, and that is clearly playing out as well in this group. It says 78% say that we're planning for multiple scenarios and have not yet made a decision. Only 8% have said they have made a decision that haven't announced it, and another 8% say that they have made a decision and announced it. That leads me to my next question. So we are hearing lots of different scenarios in this area of planning for multiple scenarios in order to be ready to implement once the pathway to a decision becomes clear. And so I would love for some of our panelists to talk about scenario planning on your campuses. Maybe Rock, if you want to start us off.
Yeah, I'd be glad to. So again, the thing we talked about at the beginning of the webinar is that we really want our students to come back for fall, and we want to be safe at the same time. But our reasoning is that higher education is facing a financial crisis on multiple fronts if we lose enrollment, because we have enrollment issues with tuition, we have housing and dining issues, we're most likely going to have budget cuts if we're a public institution from the state because of the financial situation at a national, state, and regional level. So we have lots of issues that are facing us. And so in order to not have to deal with quite as much, we really need our enrollments to maintain stable. And the numbers we're seeing, the survey data, the talk is that if students aren't doing face-to-face learning, we're probably going to lose our enrollments. So we want to create a fall that allows them to return and be on campus so that we can maintain our enrollments. We're looking at multiple scenarios, and we're including faculty in those discussions because we want to make sure what we offer is really robust, academically robust, so that the classes are what the students really want and need. And we're looking at lots of different options, as I'm sure my other colleagues are. Again, cutting down the number of students in the classroom at one time. So maybe having, if you have a class that meets 3 times a week, part of that class is face-to-face, the other part of that class is online, and then rotating people in and out so that one day you're in class, but the next time someone else might be. So you're still getting some face-to-face instruction. So sort of a rotating schedule for every class. Other classes, if they're really large, maybe they're the type class that fits better for just strict lecturing. That type might be able to go online and open up some of our large lecture halls for the smaller classes. And then also looking at the calendar, which I think we're going to talk about later. Is there a way to tweak it so there's not as much coming and going from campus throughout the semester? So lots of options to look at there. We haven't decided on any one particular thing. We're actually looking at all the options and trying to see which ones fit for which classes. And it's probably not going to be an across the board situation. It's going to be these type classes work better this way. These type classes work better this way. And how do we make all that fit together to accomplish our goals of keeping everyone safe and back on campus in the fall?
Thanks, Rock. Rick, do you want to maybe jump in next?
Yeah, very, very similar to Rock. So I won't add a whole lot because a lot of that I'll say ditto. We've not made a decision yet. We're looking at lots and lots of options. One of the things that's new for us is that we're working at this stage in the game. We're working a little closer with Faculty Senate than we typically would at this point to bounce ideas and thoughts back and forth. But we are likely moving in a direction of putting the physical barrier reality in front of our individual colleges and departments. But then standing right beside that, we're going to have a group of folks that are here to help support course development, especially online hybrid course development. And we're going to go out to the colleges and say, okay, here's the physical reality. Now, here are the options that you have of what you're going to do. And we're trying to, as a team, go out and support each one of our colleges and have the conversations so it becomes much more of an iterative process so that they can think it through and they can work through scenarios. We can provide them with professional support. And then as decisions are made, we can start to update timetable to what it is that we're going to do. I suspect we're going to end up with a very hybrid model where some are online, some key experiences, some small group work is face-to-face, and then there's going to be a fair amount of asynchronous work is what I expect to happen. But we're just now getting to the point where we're getting ready to engage with our colleges in that kind of team approach.
Thanks, Rick. Tara.
Similar, we are still reviewing a variety of scenarios to offer students a menu of options. Similar with faculty, because I think we all know that even if we're welcoming students back to campus, there could be a large population of our workforce that isn't able to leave home, whether it be because of a compromised immune system or because they're caring for young children who can't go back to their elementary schools. So we are taking all of that into consideration and working with faculty to build courses so that they can be offered remote or offered in the classroom, similar to what Rick and Rock were just saying. Like, we could potentially have students in the classroom, students learning remotely. Some of our classrooms are set up right now to be equipped for online learning so that we could have students learning remotely at the same time and still offer synchronous sessions as we've been doing since we've gone remote with our traditional population. Our online students, who are primarily adult learners, haven't really seen any kind of break anywhere. They're chugging along as best as they can because they didn't have to pivot. They were fully online from the get-go. And what we recently did and announced this week was we created a gap year experience for the traditional age population in case they don't want to jump right into college this fall. And it will give them a couple of different opportunities to learn or earn credit with us while still having a gap experience. But again, we are really reviewing a bunch of different scenarios and looking at all of the variables for the fall.
Thanks, Tara. Tim, do you want to add anything to
I think that we are very similar. I'm glad Tara mentioned the faculty. I know that we have some faculty that are very concerned because of caring for a loved one with a compromised immune system, or they fall into a category that is at high risk. And our academic administration has already shared with the faculty that if they teach a course that can be moved online and they are uncomfortable teaching on campus, then they have the option to request 100% online teaching load. And we've had several faculty that have already taken advantage of that. So lots of concern there. Of course, from a registrar's perspective, that means recoding a lot of classes in the class schedule, making those changes very quickly, because we want to be sure our classes are coded correctly in order for our students to make wise choices. If they really don't want an online class, then we want to be sure that they know that they're selecting a class that we do expect to be on ground. But of course, our expectations for that class being on ground might not be reality in another 6 weeks. But for the time being, we want to be sure that we're coding everything in a manner that the students and advisors know what they're asking for, know what they're registering for. Because we are experiencing, like I'm sure everyone is, some frustration by students that thought they were signing up for an on-ground class. Now suddenly it's online. They're not comfortable in that learning environment. The other side is that we've received a lot of positive feedback from our students about the efforts that their faculty went to get that class online and maintain a positive learning experience. We used almost a train the trainer model, where we spent our extra week of spring break with our expert online instructors teaching their discipline-specific colleagues how to move their class online. And so I think that had a really positive impact on our student experience. But we still remain concerned about our faculty and their comfort coming back, as well as our students in that decision process.
Thanks so much, Tim. And this leads me to our last question and our last live poll. Yeah, probably our last live poll, because we're getting a little short on time and I want to leave time for Q&A. But we're going to talk about calendars next. And so this next live poll is, are you considering a calendar change as one aspect of your planning? When talking about changing calendars and term structures, I'm going to ask Rick to comment on what the implications that you're working through are, and are there implications for the spring as well as for the fall? So I'm going to direct this first question at Rick, and then perhaps some of our other panelists might have something to add while we're waiting for the poll to finish.
Yeah. At Virginia Tech, we're looking at a couple of potential scenarios. Now, like a lot of you, the caveat here is we are considering these. We have floated some of these ideas through our upper administration, and there's been enough interest to push on it. But none of this is decided. So there's my disclaimer. We're looking at a couple different scenarios. One, we're focused on fall. Fall, not drastic. The most drastic thing that we are likely to do at this point is start a week early, and then stop all residential face-to-face in-person instruction by Thanksgiving. And then the plans, there's a couple different options, but everything from actually getting exams in before students leave, or shifting exams online, or even potentially doing some online instruction after that and then exams. So nothing too drastic, probably very similar. There's been a lot of schools that have come out with similar plans, pretty public. I've seen Syracuse, South Carolina, a couple others recently that have come out of that. So nothing drastic there. We're also looking at, in anticipation of a potential spike, there's some models that show a spike in the winter. We're also at least considering something a little bit more drastic, at least for us, is to avoid the winter months, is potentially starting up spring as late as the middle of March, which would push us going all the way until the end of June, which obviously, yes, all the things you're wondering about. Yeah, there's lots of issues with that. But what it does is it allows us to have a more robust, longer online winter session. Typically our winter is 3 weeks. And so this would carry us to closer to 6 weeks. We would have some options there. And then we would do a full 15-week spring. And then finally we would finish up with a short 6-week summer. We've been working closely with financial aid. We have at least reached out to the Department of Ed to ask, would some type of allowance be given in the type of scenario, given what we're dealing with. And there's some unofficial indication that perhaps that could occur, but our Director of Financial Aid is still working through that piece. Obviously, faculty contracts, what they look like is coming into play, and so we're doing a little bit of planning there in case we want to shift to that plan. And we do believe, however, though, that our creditors, that we should be in good shape there, because we're still meeting all of our standards, at least as we've seen it thus far. But we are early in planning, so there's still a lot that will be developed before we could go down that road.
Excellent. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Anyone else want to comment on that before we open up Q&A? I think we're going to go.
This is Rock. I was just going to real quickly say, very much like Rick, we're looking at all options, but I think our preference would be not to actually have to move the actual beginning and ending dates of the semester if we can all help it. But again, if you've been watching the news, other institutions like South Carolina, there are a couple of institutions in North Carolina State, they're starting early for the fall, and they're canceling their fall breaks. So there's institutions that are doing that, but because of all the implications of financial aid and all the pieces that we'd have to move around, we're really hoping we can keep the bookends of the start and end dates the same. But again, at this point, we're open to whatever we need to do to keep everyone safe and still hold our semester.
Thanks, Rock. I'm going to move into the Q&A section so that we have some time for Q&A before we have to close. We have one question that about social distancing. We have found almost none of our classrooms can accommodate 6 feet of social distancing. Have any of you considered a more modest but still substantial social distancing benchmark? So if maybe one of our panelists or a couple of our panelists could talk about what's the benchmark you're using?
Yep. At Virginia Tech, I'll answer real quick. It's 6 feet. I have pushed on emergency management to say, are you sure? Is there something else that we can do to mitigate and therefore reduce that space? Our experts on our campus are saying, no, absolutely, that's the minimum. In fact, the pushback I got was, well, we wanted it to be 10. I said, okay, we'll stick with 6. But so we're trying to follow those guidelines, but I think a lot of folks are asking this question. So my suspicion is that we're going to see some clarity as we move forward, especially from CDC. I think in the document that came out earlier this week, they're saying 6 feet. But at the moment, we are not pushing it beyond that on our campus anyway.
This is Tim. We're looking more at class rotation where because the limited seating and social distancing ability in our classrooms, we could be looking at a student actually physically being in class once every 2 weeks, but the other times broadcasting those classes via Zoom.
Excellent. Thanks, Tim. One of our audience members has indicated that the state has indicated that space can be utilized at 50% of capacity currently. So they're trying to make plans for that in the fall. And so they're working to move classes to larger spaces, holding overflows online, and operating at 50% of what the fire code capacity is. And so that's another interesting way to look at it. Another question, this one is about clinicals. So curious for schools who have students in clinicals that hadn't started yet and now unknown when they'll be able to complete. They clearly can't be in spring term. Are you offering priority registration for those students? And really any of those sort of clinical areas. Can any of our panelists talk to that? Yeah, I'm not sure that that's a good one for our panelists. So we'll file that away. Oh, Tim, were you gonna jump in?
Yeah, I would just say that for our health sciences, those students that were able to go out into clinicals are out there helping on the front lines. In some cases, our facilities were okay with that and others not. But our health sciences are all limited admission. So the population is very well controlled. So we've And we have longstanding partnerships. So we have some students out there on the front lines, but we're scheduling as we can. As far as a priority, that's not necessarily a concern unless we start overlapping two classes.
Thanks for that, Tim. I have a question specifically for Tara, asking if she can share a little bit more about the gap year experience and what that might involve. And I want to include a comment from another audience member who's indicated that, Michelle Keller, she's indicated that they will also be starting a gap year program that will be entirely online and about half the cost of their current campus program. And so that sounds like an interesting model too, but I'm going to ask Tara to talk about her gap year.
Thank you. So right now, what is live and out there is we are offering up to 6 credits, 6 academic credits of 2 of our courses that are easily transferable and wildly accepted into our own programs for roughly $5,000, which is a significant discount from our on-campus tuition rate. And within that, so students can take 3 credits if they are a student that may want to matriculate into the program, into a program with us or into an undeclared program with us. They would be eligible for federal financial aid if they hit the 6 credit mark. Otherwise, the 3 credits students would attend with us as a non-matriculated student. The credits would easily transfer, and it is all going to be virtual. It's a virtual experience, but again, because we have campuses in Montreal and Dublin, we can include virtual experiences from both of those cities, and we're also planning on different speaker series. A whole part of our experience will be about well-being and helping students to be prepared for their first year of college when they finally do matriculate. So we are in the process of planning out what the second semester looks like, should the student want to do more than just a semester. And they could potentially earn 12 credits at that point. Like our vision is really for students who, you know, are not sure what they want to do given the time that we're in. And again, it's going to be totally virtual. So they'll be able to have some really interesting experiences, engage with other people that are in the same space as they are, not really knowing what they want to do right now. And we're hoping just to give them an experience that'll help them decide if they want to matriculate with us or matriculate someplace else.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Tara. I'm afraid we are at the end of our time, and so I'm going to have to close the Q&A. I think we got through most of the questions. This webinar has been recorded, and the Q&A will be available along with the chat in the recorded session. So next slide, Michael. For those of you who need much more specific and tailored guidance, AACRAO Consulting has marshaled expertise to offer heavily discounted express consulting sessions priced at $995 to support your unique challenges with seasoned expertise and actionable recommendations. For more information, please contact consulting@acrao.org. Next slide. And I would just like to invite you to attend one of our upcoming free virtual events. We have a robust schedule in the next month or two, including topics on CXC examinations, on the US Census operation and how you operate and how you should be reporting your students, protecting your institution from academic fraud, verification of international records, and a presentation on the all-new rollout of AACRAO Edge. So I hope to see you at an upcoming event. Thank you so much for your time this afternoon. Have a wonderful holiday weekend, and I hope that you all stay safe. Thank you very much.